Hello, this is Professor Robert Linds, a law librarian at the University of Colorado Law School in Boulder, Colorado. This is another presentation on the topic of secondary authority, but in this presentation we'll be looking specifically at two titles, Restatements of the Law and Uniform Laws Annotated, and how they can help you in certain research situations. Let's start with the Restatements of the Law. A restatement of the law is a publication drafted by the American Law Institute in which the drafters, draw out the common law principles, the black letter rule for common law subjects. So of the various common law subjects such as torts or contracts or property, these individuals would read through the various cases in which there are decisions about topics within those areas and identify the black letter rules for all the various issues that come up in there. And then they would very handily provide comments describing how the rule applies and what the cases say about it, and then illustrations how you would actually apply the rule in an example. Furthermore, they would then annotate their black letter rule with case summaries and citations to cases. And they would update these, and they continue to update those new cases come out that are relevant to the restatement rule. It is a very useful tool if you're looking at common law subjects, because you can find the black letter rule and you can find relevant cases. There are various editions. The first editions came out in the 1920s through the 1940s, and that edition was very much descriptive. They were telling us what the law was in the common law subject areas. The second, and there's a third edition as well, these tended to be more prescriptive, more of an effort on the drafter's part to suggest where the law is developing and where it should be adopted. It is a good tool to use. The one thing about the editions is they are not necessarily later editions do not necessarily replace earlier editions. So property, for example, there's a first, second, and third restatement of property, but the later editions, while they may have some overlap, generally treat new subjects than the older ones. Therefore, regardless of the age of the restatement, you can use all of them for your research. The restatements are persuasive authority, even though they're drawing out black letter law from cases. The restatement itself and the comments made by the drafters are simply persuasive authority. The case itself is really the mandatory authority and the primary authority as is appropriate. And these are available in print, but they're also available online, Lexis and Westlaw, and at the end of this presentation will be a demonstration of those. A similar tool for legislation is a set of uniform laws and model acts. So here we have another commission, this time the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws and the American Law Institute, who as a committee would draft not perfect model legislation, but sound model legislation that would take and affect all the nuances that legislation in a particular area should incorporate. So probably the most notable example of it, most well-known example, is the Uniform Commercial Code. The Uniform Commercial Code is a huge piece of legislation. It's very complicated. The subject area for commercial law it would be difficult for many state legislators to tackle and to put into legislative session. So the advantage for the state legislators is they can take advantage of the expertise of the commissioners on uniform state laws and the ALI, who can draft good legislation for the commercial arena, taking into account all these nuances, undoubtedly consulting experts along the way on how that law should work. And they've done this in numerous areas, in the probate code and property, family law, a whole bunch of different areas. So it's secondary authority, right? The uniform law itself or the model law itself is secondary authority until it's enacted by the state legislature. Then it becomes primary authority in that state. You can go to their website, the uniformlaws.org website, for information about the process and who's involved, and also a list of the uniform laws and which states have adopted them. And then they also give advocacy kits for adopting those laws. There is a publication by West, Thomson Reuters West. It's the Uniform Laws Annotated. And what this set does is it provides the text of the uniform laws, and it also provides the commentary that the commission would issue. But that also tells us the list of the states that have enacted the law and some notes of decisions where they are there. So this is a very useful set if you're doing research in the uniform laws. You want to see which states have adopted them, and do a little research into cases that have litigated under them. The real value for legal research, why this is such a nice set, is that if your state has adopted a uniform law and you are litigating a provision of that uniform law under your state code that has not yet been litigated, you can turn to this set and you can locate what other states have adopted that code, and then look at that provision in that state's code and look at the case annotations for that state's code to see if they've litigated, one of their courts have litigated it. Now, of course, that's not going to be mandatory authority within your jurisdiction, but it will certainly help you develop arguments and maybe make a strong persuasive authority to your jurisdiction's court about how your court should interpret that, particular court provision. So that's the value of that tool. At this point, let's go ahead and look at where we can find restatements of the law and the Uniform Laws Annotated on Lexis Advance and Westlaw. For this demonstration, I'm going to start in Lexis Advance, and let's go ahead and look for the restatement of property and look up information about servitudes on property. So here's Lexis Advance. I'm already signed in. A couple different ways to get there. You can certainly type in restatements of the law and you'll see it pops up, but I think what we'd like to do is go to secondary materials and then go to restatements. The reason why I'm doing this is that if you enter in the database in LexisNexis, you can then search it directly. This gives us more of a topical overview. And with that, I want to show you that the restatements of law, as mentioned in the presentation, are really common law restatement of common law principles. And you can see the subjects that are typically common law principles are really listed here: agency, contracts, employment law, property, restitution, torts, and a few others as well. So it's a common law principle. If you're looking for a common law case principle, then restatement can be very useful. Let's drill down, look at property. And the other thing to note is, as I mentioned in the lecture, there are actually different editions of the restatements of property, and they build upon each other. They don't necessarily supersede each other. So in this demonstration, we see that there's Restatement of Law of Property, official text. This is really the first edition. And then there is a second edition with two different titles: Donative Transfers and Landlord and Tenant. And then you see Restatement of Law of Property third, which deals with mortgages, servitudes, wills, and other donative transfers. So while some of these topics may be covered on or touched upon in the first, really it's an expansion of a greater coverage of property law. So let's look at Restatement Law of Property, and what we'll find there, and as a good rule, what we'd like to do is to go look at an introduction or a summary, or in this case a scope note, and that'll tell us a little bit about what they're trying to accomplish. And it says right here, the law of property constitutes a substantial fraction of all American law. A restatement of it in its entirety would require a considerable series of volumes and many more years of work than yet been found feasible in this project. And that's what they did. This came out starting in the 1920s or 30s, and over the next 50, 60, 70 years they developed those other editions. All right, so that is the scope note. That'll give us context of what's in this particular restatement on property, and you can see the topics that they touch upon. an introduction and definition of certain general terms. There's a division on freehold estates, a division on future interests, and a division on servitudes. It's really servitudes to which we turn, and within servitudes they're looking at easements, licenses, and promises respecting the use of land. And let's just go look at easements. We have another introductory note about easements. We ought to check it out. And it tells us a little bit about the distinction of those privileges of present use, etc., etc. And what we really want to know is something about the creation of an easement by really what I want to look for is under adverse possession. So prescription, and here it is adverse use. So let's assume we want to know what the black letter rule was about creation of an easement by adverse use. Here is a section on it, and this is it. Section 458. Here's the black letter rule, bolded, of course. And then what we find is comments and illustrations provided by the Uniform Law, provided by the drafters of the restatement. So here's a comment about how we're to understand this black letter rule, and then it also provides illustrations of how it would apply, full, of course, of references to black acre, and then other comments to clauses and illustrations. All right, so this is an important part. We have two things. We have the black letter law, and we have comments and illustrations to help us understand what the black letter law is and really how to apply it. But the third thing is we want the cases they relied upon, or cases that illustrate the rule. In Lexis Advance, that's located under citators. Here is citators. There are apparently 61 cases, and here they all are. A little bit hard to read. Case citations of the first restatement. Here's a case of Merriman. This comes in 1961. Comes out of New York court. And if we go through these, we'll see various court cases. All right. So this is the way Lexis does the restatements. And this is the restatement first of property. There's still a restatement third of property, but let's go look at Westlaw for that and see how Westlaw does it. Again, we could do the same thing. We could type in here restatements of the law, but I think we'll go back to secondary sources, and again we want to pull out, narrow down from the publication type. We'll apply the filter, and now we see the various restatements. Similar list, should be the same list as we saw in the other one. Here's Restatement of the Law of Property, and there are the various versions of it. And here is the restatement first of property, and here again are the same divisions. It's a little bit more involved. There's an appendix to volume 1 and 2 with cases in it. Let's go back, look at servitudes and easements and creation. We're trying to find that same one, prescription, adverse use. And this is the way Westlaw displays that same section we saw in Lexis Advance, 458 adverse use. Here's the black letter rule, the comments, and then we see a link here for case citations by jurisdiction. Here they have it divided by the jurisdiction. So if you wanted to look just for the Colorado case or cases that are relevant, there's a quick way to jump down to it. All right, so that's servitudes as it appeared in the first restatement of property. Now, it may not be covered in a later version of the restatement of property, but we do see that they did for restatement third of property. They address it specifically to servitudes. So we could drill in there, and we can see the same. Actually, it's a more in-depth division analysis of servitudes. We see additional topics are covered, like common interest communities, for example. We can look at the creation of servitudes, and it'll be the same kinds of things. It's a little bit more involved, but it's the same sort of thing, created by implication, and Here's a black letter rule about it, and the same thing that we saw before. You should go back and look at the introductory note. One thing you'll notice is that the editors do indicate that they are uh, uh, less making less effort to be descriptive and telling us what the black letter law is, and more so prescriptive, suggesting and making sort of recommendations in how the law should be. But nonetheless, you'll find the black letter law and you'll find cases as well. All right, so that is the restatements of law. Of course, note the updating when it was last updated. Even the first restatements will be updated with new cases if that's the principles of law that you're looking for. But this is the restatement of law on Westlaw and Lexis Advance. Let's change gears and look for the Uniform Laws Annotated. Now that is a West publication, therefore it's on Westlaw. And it's very useful, as is mentioned in the lecture, but let's go find it. So here is, in fact, we'll do this time, we'll just go up Uniform Laws Annotated. Here it is, ULA. And you can see now here is a table of contents listing of the various uniform laws. The first one, and probably the one that's most notable, is the Uniform Commercial Code. And it even has it by the various articles, and then they organize it by topic: business and nonprofit organizations, business and financial laws, estate, probate and related laws, family, matrimonial and health laws, uniform rules of criminal procedure, model penal code, criminal law procedure, civil procedure, and remedial laws. So it's a comprehensive collection of sort of those ideal legislation that state legislatures can adopt. For our purposes, why don't we go back to the property arena? And what I'd really like to look at as an example is common interest ownership. And you see there are actually 3 entries, which means that the commission drafted 3 sort of model versions of common interest ownership laws, and states may have adopted one and not adopted another, whatever. But here it is. We pull it up, common interest ownership. And the first thing we'll want to do really is, in addition to sort of looking over all these articles, we really want to look at the references and annotations. The reason why I start here is because it tells us which of these jurisdictions has adopted this 1982 version of the Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act. We see there are 5 states, Colorado among them, but it's also telling us the effective date and where it's located within their code, where it's located within their annotated, their statutory provisions. In Colorado, it's Title 38, Article 33.3. But Minnesota puts it at 515B 1-101, etc. Again, this is useful because typically what state legislatures do is they'll keep the numbering of and the organization of the model or uniform law, and then simply plug it into the point in their code where it fits. So if you have a provision that you're litigating in Colorado, that hasn't been litigated in Colorado before, but it has perhaps in Minnesota, it's easy to find it that way to match the section number from the Colorado code to the Minnesota code. All right, this tells us a little bit more about who developed it, and really at this point what we'd like to do is go back to the document itself, and let's assume we are needing to litigate a section of it, perhaps here on the upkeep of common interest community 3-107 and the uniform law. And it's going to tell us what the code section is. This is the language of the code section, the editor's notes for what the act permits, some library references for further research. Here's a reference to the CJS that we looked at a different video, and here's a reference to the topic and key number, which we'll look at when we discuss cases. But then also you find notes of decisions or cases from from the jurisdictions that have adopted the uniform law looking at this particular code section. And there's one from the Minnesota Appellate Court and another from Alaska, the state of Alaska. So again, we could look up what the case said about this, and maybe this will help us in Colorado where this hasn't been litigated. Okay, with that, that brings to a conclusion an introduction to restatements and uniform laws. Okay, and with that demonstration, this particular presentation is done. If you have any questions, here's my contact information. Please let me know. Thank you.